People who moved into older houses where the previous owners had left their things in the attic or basement. What was the weirdest, creepiest, most interesting thing you found? When I was a kid we moved into a house that had been built in the 1920s. Mum found a barrel in the crawlspace full of crystal glasses from before the Depression and lots of other very nice dishes. Mom was stoked. A lot of old crystal was made with lead in it. For your information. I was told a hoarder once lived in my house. When she died, a guy bought the house from the estate, cleaned it up, fixed it up, and sold it to me. He had gotten rid of almost all the bizarre junk but he missed a few things. For example, there was a cabinet on the wall in the garage that contained a big burlap sack full of chicken feathers. Not nice downy feathers like you might make into a pillow. Just all kinds of coarse feathers. Like if you killed a chicken yourself and plucked it and saved all the feathers. And kept doing this until you had a big bag full of feathers. Some of the feathers were bloody. Maybe she wanted to see if a pound of feathers was in fact heavier than a pound of lead. We bought an old Victorian. The previous owner only had it for 3-4 years when he sold it. He didn't leave much, mostly just some junk and odds and ends, except everywhere kind of out of the way, in the attic, in the crawl space, in the water heater closet, in the space under the base of the sink, stuck under floorboards, was just full of machetes. Over 50 machetes. Hidden all over the place. Over 10 years and occasionally we still turn one up. Just really creepy. Never can be too sure. Bought a house that had not been lived in since 1970. It's like the owners just disappeared. Hoarder's house. Every room full of crap. But their cake safe still had a cake in it and the bread box had bread. Both rock hard. A girl I know went into the basement of the old house that she was renting and found a spine in the ceiling. It was an unfinished ceiling. She called the landlord and he quickly said it was a dog spine. Took it and left. Later she went to check out a noise in the attic and when she opened the attic door a ton of crayons showered down on top of her. Finds spine in attic and calls landlord instead of police. That's like the crap you see people in a horror movie doing before they get haunted by some demonic entity. Not me but my childhood friend. They were remodeling their home and broke into one of the walls and outpoured tons of old P magazines and women's underwear. When we moved into my parents' current house, it had been empty for almost 30 years. It was packed full of things that the previous owner's family had left there when the owners had passed away. We're talking first edition books, vintage typewriters, a vintage washing machine dryer combination. I have decorative moths and butterflies under glass, vintage license plates. I have letters from the 40s that the woman who lived in the house had written. There were songs she wrote and tried to submit them to different record labels in New York City. Before the owner of the home's antique appraisers came and emptied the place out, we got in there and took a few things. One of them being a porcelain doll. I used to collect porcelain dolls when I was younger. I probably had close to 75. So I did what I normally did whenever I got a new doll. I named her. I decided that her name was Beatrice. Later come to find out that that was the name of the woman who had died in the house. I always thought that was kind of funny. It's all fun and games until the ghost of the woman who died in your house comes back through a stolen doll to haunt your family. I hope you are well versed in lifting curses. I moved into my house recently. In the attic was a Sega Saturn box. I was overwhelmed with joy when I lifted it up and there was something in it. Contained in it was a broken PS1. Despite nursing it back to health, I could only reason that their kids broke their PlayStation and they replaced it with a Saturn. This made me feel sad for them. Frick it. Collectors would love that box if it was still in good shape. When I moved into our house it was pretty spotless. They didn't leave a single thing behind except in one of the drawers in the main bathroom they had left a slightly used tube of hemorrhoid ointment. I'm pretty sure he left it there on purpose. Previous owners were just warning you why they moved out. That house is a pain in the butt. I'm a contractor. Went on a walkthrough of an estate sale property with a customer and his real estate agent to inspect the house and plan renos. I climbed into the attic and came face to face with a giant glass eye doll. You know the ones, when you lay them back the eyes close. Dang thing was 4 feet tall, laying on its side, and right in my face, with one eye open and one half freaking shut. I was a little weirded out. I told the customer to take a look. He climbed up and was a little freaked out. The real estate agent climbed up and jumped back down screaming. I still chuckle over that one. A chain letter from the early 20th century. Aside from the doom and gloom threat of not passing the letter along, it mentioned one lady unexpectedly receiving a free petticoat. Whoa, I had no idea chain mail had been around that long. My parents live in a century home that had wallpaper throughout. When they were removing in one of the bedrooms, it had a drawing on the wall. This was an aerial view of the property from 45-50 years in the past. It showed that the property was a farm and all of the outbuildings animal enclosures. He signed his name at the bottom. One day an RV pulled up. The older gentleman got out and was staring at the house. My mom said, "Are you?" He said, "How did you know?" And they talked about living in the house and was surprised anyone saw the drawing. At the time he moved to the US, we live in Canada. He also told us a story about how when he was young, his grandma wasn't a fan of his grandpa's gun. She gave it to him when his grandpa was out and he took it to the unfinished attic and dropped it down one of the walls. We were never able to locate it. I would tear all the drywall out looking for a gun that old. Friends moved into a house and found a package of meat in the fridge. They called up the previous owners, who'd recently moved to a bigger house after having a baby, and asked them did they want to come back and collect the package of meat they'd forgotten in the fridge. "Definitely, we'll be over after the weekend for it." "Okay, but sure you don't want it for the weekend? Can't make it, but don't throw it out." "Well, my wife needs it." "Okay, fair enough. But why is it that important?" "It's her placenta. She'll cook it and eat it. It's good for nursing mothers, YC." They didn't call back for it after the weekend, so my friend dug a hole in the backyard, a small 125 square plot out the back of UK inner city terrace, and buried the placenta. Some decent sized rocks. The next few nights the yard was filled with screeching cats wailing and stalking the area looking for it. My midwife told me a story. One of her patients was living in a rental house, but wanted to bury her placenta. They froze the placenta and the couple buried it at the bottom of a large pot plant with a tree on top. They went out for the day, and when they came home, the placenta had thawed and there was blood all over the porch that had leaked out of the pot plant. My brother bought a house. It was full of elephants. Small ones, big ones, elephants in one color, elephants in many colors, everywhere. From the basement to the attic, the whole house. Seriously, a shitload of elephant sculptures. I found an old empty trunk that was too large to fit through the attic hatch, or through any of the attic vents. Which kind of puzzled me because I have yet to find any evidence of any prior hatch or access in which that trunk could have been brought into the attic. They remodeled, changing the size of the attic hatch. When they moved out they realized that trunk was going nowhere. A friend of mine from high school had something like this. When we were freshmen and his older brother a junior, his brother found 94 bottles of liquor in the attic under the insulation. They were bottles of Taka brand vodka, Taka gin, and Kentucky Tavern bourbon. The three of us all quietly used it as our own private stash until Dean, older brother, got a DUI and finally told his dad where he got all the old booze that the cops found in the car. Was a great year. 94 bottles of booze in the walls. 94 bottles of booze. You drink most of them down. Get a DUI. Dad confiscates the rest of your booze. Mother. Here's a story my mother told me. One day police came and knocked on her door and told her she had to evacuate her house temporarily. The city brought a bus and picked up all the residents of her block and took them away to a safe place for a few hours. It turned out there was a house up the block that had been occupied by a retired high school chemistry teacher. When he died, someone discovered that he had hoarded a bunch of chemicals in his basement that were highly toxic and unstable and might leak or explode. The truck that was going to haul the stuff away needed to pass by my mom's house, so they evacuated the whole block as a precaution. There was no leak or explosion, as it turns out. Yes, the previous owners left this huge, 6x9 FT, awesome old map of Houston from 25 years ago, missing entire neighborhoods that had been developed since. It was screwed into the wall of the garage apartment and I stared at it for hours. Then we fixed up the apartment and gave the map to some friends who were really excited about it. In a closet was the original blueprint and the contract from the contractor that built it. My $160,000 house was built new for $12 grand in 1962. $12,000 in 1962 had the same buying power as $94,610 in 2016. Knocked down a wall in a 1913 house and found an empty whiskey pint from a local druggist with a 1912 date on it. Had an address of a downtown location that no longer exists due to redoing street layouts, I guess. Can't find anything on the internet about the druggist, but it's sitting on a shelf I built now. Local library or town history office if you have one. Mine's a little different, as we don't have a basement attic, but a lot of stuff was buried in my yard. It was almost treated like a garbage dump, so I'm digging a hole for a post a few years back and I hit something. I'm about 30 centimeters down at this point, and assume it's rock, so I hit it again. Nope, hollow sound. I reach down there and pull out not one but two antique bottles. Filthy, but undamaged. Sweet. I think to myself, but I feel something else. A little more work and up comes the body of a revolver. No handle, no chamber, really beats to crap. I immediately notice a seam down the length of the barrel, so it's not an actual gun, but a replica. A bit of research tells me that it's actually a 50-year-old cap gun worth around $300, 500 mint. I sold that beat up thing for $50. We're planning an extension soon, so hopefully I can dig up some more treasure. My wife's uncle found a rusted old revolver in his yard when they dug out a pool. It's now hanging in his man cave garage. We found some kind of 8-9 foot homemade surfboard. Looked like it was made from plywood and enamel paint. Must have been 40-50 years old. I renovate and remodel houses for a living. We did an old house a few years ago for a guy who bought the house from the estate of an old Norwegian man who had lived there before he died. We found an UA-43 hidden behind a fourth wall in the basement, as well as ammunition for something much bigger that we never found. Sadly, we weren't allowed to keep the gun. The owner knew there were firearms hidden somewhere in the house from the estate, and he got to keep it because the place was his. Too bad you couldn't keep it. It's probably worth $1,500 to $2,000. I rented a 6-bedroom house made in 1912 in downtown Bellingham. The first sign I had that it was a little spooky is that from some angles you could see beware of the raccoons on one of the bedroom walls. It had been painted over but not totally concealed. One drunken night my roommates and I checked out the attic and found a 4x4 feet painting of a man looking into a mirror at you. Bellingham is art majors, engineers and teachers. Looks like you got one of those places that students had rented before. I lived in a beautiful Victoria house that was so spooky, it had been in my boyfriend's families for many generations. In the attic was tons of old clothes from his grandparents, just all boxed up and untouched for a long time. I guess the grandpa fell over and died in the living room, and then a few days later the grandma died in the dining room, both of unknown causes. I found a handwritten journal in the attic which was all stories of his uncle's adventures. His uncle would explore and chart jungles. There was an entry where he found dead cut up bodies of a tribe he thought might be hunting and eating another tribe. When I found a photo of the uncle I was so freaked out. He looked exactly like my boyfriend. They named him after his uncle as well. He always hated that. The family didn't like to talk about the uncle. He went missing in the jungle and they never found a body. We also found an old Victorian photo album of his relatives. If you've ever seen them, they're so spooky. Some of the photos had babies in them that were perfectly crisp, and their eyes looked glassed over. Since then I learned it was most likely because the babies were dead when the photos were taken. That house always freaked me out. Mother stash of DVDs in the basement. Funny part is they were basically in plain sight to the right of the stairs when you go down there. They were sitting on an old dryer and washer with some old electric equipment. Maybe 600 DVD discs with pics and clips. It was a good early adolescence. We bought a house that was previously a children's home for orphans and abandoned kids. Huge house. 8 bedrooms, 4 big suite, full baths, etc. 4,000 square featuring with big garage. When we were cleaning to move in, I opened some cabinets and there were little labels, shoes, t-shirts, towels, etc. Enough for 12 kids and several cupboards. This struck me as so sad. No dresses, just a shelf with labels. Institutional life. We ripped them out, painted, and lived there for 19 years. Surprisingly, WS often had people drop by and tell us they lived there as children and had good memories of the place. That's good. At least people aren't stopping by telling you your house was a nightmare heck house. Not me, but my aunt. She recently moved into a farmhouse, way out in the country. Apparently before they moved in, the previous owners told her that their son was a big time drug dealer. I don't know the whole story, so don't ask. He got in big time trouble, so he's out of the picture. They also said that if she finds anything remotely sketchy, call the police or leave it alone. About 2 weeks later, she found a box in the basement. This box is in a hole in the floor, so you have to pull it out to access it. She called the previous owners and they said they have no idea what that is and that it may be rigged. Freaking rigged. Needless to say, she hasn't touched it yet. I'm sure it's all balls, but what the frick? That there's a box of cash. Renovator here for the past 5 years. I've torn into many a house but have only found one truly cool thing. House built in the 1830s. The attic was used as storage but had later been filled with blown-in insulation. One of our tradesmen was drilling into the attic to install a new plumbing pipe when he hit some resistance. His drill bit hit a stack of paintings from the 1800s and luckily only broke the glass on the first one. There were some very cool portraits of a few women and some military officers. We gave them to the homeowner, who said she would get them appraised, but I never heard anything after that. I still hope someday they hire us again to do something and I can ask about the paintings. I'm always hopeful when we tear into a house, however finding anything more than old bottles, cigarettes, or the odd old coin is really quite rare. Occasionally we find notes or old writing from tradesmen, which is always fun. That sounds like a really cool benefit to the job. When the previous owners died, their kids cleaned out the freezer and just threw everything away. Apparently they didn't know that their parents had wrapped up their savings in meat paper and stuck it in the freezer. That was a mistake. Just moved into a new place last week. Not so much weird or creepy, more WTF. But they both left their college diplomas behind. One beautifully framed that I found in the basement, and one in a box in the attic. Apparently the couple had a very contentious divorce and hated each other by the time they moved out, and each thought the other was going to take the random boxes that were left. I have no clue what to do with them. My parents bought a rental property and rented it out to my brother and 5 of his friends when he turned 18. They lived there for 2 years and my bro couldn't handle living in a party house anymore, so they all moved out and I moved in. In the basement they left a soiled mattress, and on that mattress was a dead Kennedy's record, a rusty blade off a circular saw, and a white hockey mask. One of them was an artist and lived in a room upstairs that was painted purple and pink with a unicorn border around the walls. He drew these pictures of scorpions and skeletons and zombies and such all over the walls in black Sharpie. It was very odd. In the laundry room there was a curtain hanging on the window that had children's handprints in white paint all over it. Not sure what that was about. I think it was there when my parents bought the house. Always creeped me out. Letting kids play with paint and using a shower curtain to contain the mess is normal. When we went to the open home, the sleepout had maybe a dozen taxidermy animal skeletons. By memory I saw a possum, some birds, mice and rats etc. And the room stunk of chemicals to the point of standing at the door was too much. We had to replace the carpet and give the room a decent clean before we even wanted to stay in there longer than 5 minutes. I've since found under the house what I assume are some old chemicals for the preserving. Or the guy was just making M. Jeffrey Dahmer used to do taxidermy with his father and later hid his supplies, and possibly parts of his victims, in a crawlspace and garage. I wish to God I had saved it, but it was over 20 years ago. We moved into this old house where the lady had passed away and her family lived far away, so they just sold it as is. She was 90 when she passed, born in 1905, and she had saved everything. There were secret closets filled with old newspapers, phone books from the 1800s, and a collection of old camera. My favorite thing I found was an old school book. It had little lessons that the young girl would finish. Her mom would comment on each with little notes. "You are so smart and precious to me. You got X wrong, but I can see how much your handwriting is improving." It was such a beautiful, simple look into the relationship this woman had with her mom. They had hidden rooms, not like full-on rooms. I actually got in touch with the architect over these. So the story goes a little something like this. I decided to redo the walk-in pantry. It looked dated and I knew I could do it better. So I start ripping out shelves. And wouldn't you know, 2 of the walls don't have any studs in them. That's not code. So I start investigating. And holy crap, there's empty space back there. I tear it all out and there's about a 3x5 feet room. Well, closet really behind my pantry, as well as some mechanical levers and crap in the wall to access it. So at this point I'm fucked. I track down the architect and give him a call, and apparently the original owner, who commissioned and had input on the house, asked for several secret rooms to be built. Each was only large enough for 1-2 people, but there were 3 of them throughout the house. Pantry, laundry room, basement workshop utilities room, and each could be accessed through a magnetic key. Basically each had a magnet attached to a lever behind a fake wall, and by lifting that lever, which required a magnet, you could deactivate the lock on the wall and just push it open like a door. Pretty neat crap. Weird AF when we moved in. Have since knocked them all out too, or have we? I'd totally request secret rooms if I was paying an architect to design my house. When we were like 14, my friend moved into a weird, that was even on the listing for it, house with her family. We were hanging out in her bedroom and saw a hole in the wall, so we checked it out and there was a little stick doll thing, a bunch of dried herbs, hair stuff wrapped in twine, and a bunch of other weird stuff I don't remember. Nothing happened, but needless to say we put that crap back real quick and didn't mess with it again. Sounds like you found some voodoo kit. A 3-foot high crawl space that runs under the entire house, which I only learned about last year. I've heard weird banging that sounded like running coming from it before, but I'm pretty content to never go down there. Just raccoons. Yeah, that's it. No one's ever gonna believe this, but frick it. So back when I was a teen, I believed in ghosts. I am far more skeptical now, but this is one of those occasions that make me wonder. In Idaho, when my family moved into our 100-plus-year-old house, we kept hearing a sound like a bouncing ball at random intervals, and my parents kept saying it was probably the radiator. I thought that was odd since you could hear it in different places, but I figured it was debunked anyways. Well, a couple years later, I'm a teen and I start trying to contact ghosts, and of course I give the Ouija board a shot. I'm using a handmade one in the house and the pointer keeps going to high. I had both high and hello written on the board, and I keep asking questions, but it just says hi. Then I ask how old it is, and the pointer moves to 3. I ask some more random questions and it sometimes goes to yes or no, sometimes hi. I ask my dad, who is a complete skeptic and was exasperated by my antics, to join me just once because I wanted him to experience what I was experiencing. After some begging he finally sat down with me and I asked some more questions, eventually asking, do you like to play with toys, and it said yes. I gave some suggestions on toys, but it kept saying no. Then my dad asks what about jacks and the pointer shoots to yes, followed immediately by the sound of the bouncing ball right next to us. I about crap a brick in fear excitement, convinced that there was no way my dad could deny this. The look on his face is something I won't forget. I could see true uncertainty there. After a minute he said it could still be a coincidence, but I could tell he was shaken. Then, and this is a killer, about 5 or 6 years later they are remodeling the kitchen. They take out the butler's pantry, and in the wall behind it was a collection of old photos, some other knickknacks, some marbles, and a freaking set of jacks. When my dad called to tell me about it, he had no argument. I could tell he had no way to explain it and was freaked out. Of course I went into a frenzy. Like I said, I'm a skeptic, but that threw me for a heavy loop. That crap is insane to me, and one of only a couple experiences I have personally had that still make me question what I think I know. Poor little guy. I bet he was happy to talk to you. We moved into a house built in the 50s and the crawl space was filled with tall wrestling trophies. 2030. We called the trophy room from then on, even after getting rid of the trophies. My house is in one of the post-war suburbs of Los Angeles, built 1951. I was trenching for some conduit and found what must have been the trash pit before formal trash collection began. just a few old bottles and rusted away cans. Interestingly, there was a bottle of Manischewitz and a Christian Brothers winery bottle touching each other. Carol, I need you to stop by the market. The Coens are coming over later, and all we have is Christian Brothers. They left a very thick bundle of dried sage hanging behind the furnace, which some people use to ward off bad spirits. In the other room Hay left a painting of a stork, the bird that delivers babies in movies, with very human eyes even though the rest is cartoonish. I briefly lived in an old house way out in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota. On the ceiling in a bedroom in the basement was a hand-painted poem that read, I wrote a little poem. I wrote it on my wrist. I wrote it with a blade. I wrote it with a twist. My parents told me the previous owner had killed himself in the backyard, and before that an elderly couple had passed away inside the house. Needless to say, we didn't stay very long. Realtor here. I sold a house to my buyer client brother last year. The people left dang near everything but their clothing, which was a whole other issue at closing. Among the most interesting things were a few books on magic spells, several legs and torsos from shop mannequins, over a dozen pairs of crutches. The weirdest thing left behind were actually buried in the walls, behind the insulation. Quick backstory. The homeowner hated me from the start and I had a nagging feeling it was a race issue. I was kind and professional throughout the entire ordeal regardless. At the closing table he absolutely loses his mind and waves his finger at me and says I'm not allowed to step foot in the home, with heavy implications it's because of my ethnicity, not his. The attorneys had to ask him to leave. It was a huge embarrassing mess. Fast forward about a week, the deal is done and my brother moves in to start remodeling. As he is working from room to room we find various photographs of children of my ethnicity buried in the walls. He is the original owner, so no one of my ethnicity was living there as far as we know. A huge mystery to this day. A bunch of Knights Templar and Masonic Temple memorabilia, a Boy Scout knife stuck blade up out of the attic floorboards, and a giant, elaborately decorated turn of the century wardrobe box with a woman's silhouette painted on it in black. It didn't seem to have a door or any hinges, so we never opened it, but when we pushed it over to make room for something else we heard things rattling around in there. We presumed they were bones. All of these things were in the same house. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.